My grandson thinks I only use my tablet to read the news. He has no idea I'm watching this entire town through their security cameras. I am Elara, a woman in my 80s. These wrinkled fingers of mine once glided across piano keys. Now, they tap against the screen of a tablet. My grandson chuckles, thinking I only use it to read the news or check the weather. But he does not know that in the faint blue glow of this screen, I am quietly watching the entire town through the security cameras they believe are private. Every shadow beneath a streetlight, every whisper of wind through a narrow alley, is like a note in the symphony of my life. Sitting here, in a room full of memories, I want to tell you my story, the story of a girl who dreamed of standing on a grand stage, of a wife and mother who set that dream aside, and of an old woman who found her lost melody again through the numbers and lights of the future. When I was a girl, these hands knew nothing of housework. Their purpose was the 88 ivory keys, cool beneath my fingertips. I did not need to look at the sheet music. My hands knew what to do on their own. They moved, and the sound followed. When I began to play, everything else seemed to cease to exist. The room would disappear. The trivial worries would vanish. There was only me and the music. Every time my fingers touched the keys, I felt truly alive, as if I were painting an entire world with sound. It was a very real feeling. Nothing else could ever make me feel that way. In my mind, there was only one path forward. I would go to the great cities. I would stand on stages with polished wooden floors. There would be rows of red velvet seats filled with people. They would come to hear me play. After I finished, they would applaud. I had always longed to hear that sound. That path took a different turn the day I met Matthias. He was a carpenter. His hands were large, rough, and calloused from his work. They were the complete opposite of mine. His hands created real things, things you could touch and use. My hands only created sound, something that vanished into the air. He knew nothing about music. He could not tell the difference between Chopin and Mozart. One day, as I was playing, he stood in the doorway and listened for a very long time. When I finished, he did not say anything about the music. He just looked at me and said one thing. "I do not understand your notes, but I understand the smile on your face when you play them. To me, that is the most beautiful music of all." No one had ever said anything like that to me before. That one sentence decided my life. I chose him. I chose a life in this small town, in this house. The sound of the piano was gradually replaced by other sounds. The cries and then the laughter of our children. The sound of their first steps. The sound of them reading their lessons aloud. That too was a kind of music. A kind of music that kept my feet on the ground. The piano in the corner of the room. First, I covered it with a sheet. Then, gradually, a thin layer of dust began to settle on the sheet. That one sentence decided my life. I chose him. I chose a life in this small town, in this house. The sound of the piano was gradually replaced by other sounds. The cries, and then the laughter, of our children. The sound of their first steps. The sound of them reading their lessons aloud. That, too, was a kind of music. A kind of music that kept my feet on the ground. I had made my choice. I chose Matthias and this life here. The first thing I did was take a large cloth and cover the grand piano. At first, I still dusted it every week. But then our children were born. The sound of the piano was replaced by the cries and laughter of children. That was also a kind of music that made me happy. Life went on just like that. I was a wife and a mother. I tended the garden, cooked meals, and mended the children's clothes. I was happy with that life. But sometimes, in my dreams, I would still find myself sitting at the piano, my fingers gliding over the ivory keys. Many years passed this way. Then, Matthias passed away. He left suddenly. A silence fell over the house. It was not a peaceful quiet. It was an emptiness. When Matthias was gone, he took all the sounds with him. I no longer heard his footsteps on the wooden floor, no longer heard his dry cough in the morning, no longer heard the rustle of him turning the newspaper pages. Our home suddenly became an endless, silent note. Every day was exactly the same. I would wake up, water the plants, clean the house, sit in this armchair and look out the window. I was not waiting for anyone. I was just looking. I felt like a shadow in my own home. Everything was still there, only its purpose was gone. The teapot was still on the stove, but there was no one left for me to make tea for. His shoes were still by the door, but they were not going anywhere. I thought I would live out the rest of my days like this, in silence. One afternoon, my grandson stopped by. He sat in the armchair opposite me, sharing a few stories from school, his eyes occasionally glancing down at his phone. He is a good kid, but he lives in a different world, one that is too fast for me. He stayed for about an hour before leaving in a hurry, letting the house sink back into its familiar silence, a silence that now felt even heavier than before. It was not until that evening, as I was clearing the cold teacup from the table, that I saw it. Lying on the chair where he had been sitting, a thin, black, and completely unfamiliar object. His tablet. He had left it behind. I picked it up. It was heavier than I expected, and the glass surface was cold to the touch. I placed it on the table, sat down, and simply stared at it for a long time. It did not belong here, not in this world of old wooden furniture and faded fabrics. It was a doorway to the bustling world my grandson inhabited. I do not know why. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was because there was nothing else to do. I reached out with one finger, a calloused and wrinkled one, and lightly touched the black glass. Suddenly, the screen flared to life. Its blue light illuminated my face, in a room that was only used to the dim, yellow glow of a lamp. Dozens of small, colourful icons appeared. I did not understand them. I simply slid my finger across the screen without purpose. Abruptly, one image expanded to fill the entire screen. It was a piano keyboard. Electronic tones began to chime as my finger drifted across them. They were tinny, without depth or soul. They were a cheap imitation of the sound I had once loved. I let out a small laugh, a dry, hollow sound in the silent room. It was a child's game, with cartoon animals dancing in the corner of the screen. I was about to turn it off. But then, a question formed in my mind. It was so clear, it was as if someone had just whispered it in my ear. Why are there only games for children? I looked down at my own hands, then back at the screen. The elderly, those with memories that are no longer sharp, those with fingers that are no longer nimble, the lonely ones. What do they make for us? Why should there only be games for children? Don't we, the old, also need something to exercise our minds, to find joy again? That thought, it never left me again. It stayed, filling the silence in this house with something new, a purpose. The next time my grandson came over, I asked him directly, "Show me how to make an app." He looked at me, blinked a few times, and then burst out laughing. He thought I was joking. "You want to learn how to code?" he asked. And the way he emphasized that word told me just how ridiculous he found the idea. I did not laugh. I just looked him straight in the eye and nodded. "Show me how to start." Seeing that I was serious, he stopped laughing. He took the tablet, tapped on it for a moment, and then handed it back to me. He had created an account for me on a website for learning how to program. He showed me the first lesson, a video about 15 minutes long. Then he left, patting me on the shoulder and saying, "Good luck with that," his voice still laced with amusement. He thought I would forget about it in 5 minutes. He did not know me. I began. I put on my reading glasses and stared intently at the screen. The letters and symbols danced. They meant nothing to me. Algorithm, variable, loop, function. It was a completely foreign language. The first lesson asked me to make the words hello appear on the screen. That was all. I typed each character, one by one, carefully. I checked the periods and the commas again. I pressed the run button. Nothing happened. There was only a line of red text, signaling an error I could not understand. I tried again. It still did not work. I spent the entire afternoon on just those 2 words. My eyes grew tired. My back ached. I felt a sense of helplessness I had never known before. Even when playing the most difficult pieces of music, I always knew what to do. But here, I was utterly lost. On that day, and for many days after, I wanted to throw the tablet against the wall. Many times. One night, after a full week of struggling, I gave up. I closed the tablet definitively. I told myself, I am too old for this. That night, I dreamed of Matthias. The dream was so real. I was sitting at this very kitchen table, under the yellow light. The tablet was open in front of me, and he was sitting in the opposite chair, the one where he always used to sit. He was wearing the old shirt he always wore when he worked in his workshop. He did not say anything. He just looked at me, then slowly reached across the table. His large, rough hand covered mine, which was resting uselessly on the keyboard. Then he smiled. A quiet smile with no pity, only trust. I woke up while it was still dark. The room was silent. That dream was not a miracle. It was a reminder. His smile needed no words. I knew what it meant. You once conquered 88 keys. What are a few lines of code? Just keep playing your music. The next morning, I woke up and made coffee. Then I sat back down at the table and opened the tablet. From that day on, the kitchen became my workshop. I kept 2 notebooks side by side. One, an old cloth-bound notebook, held recipes for bread and stews. Its pages yellowed with grease and time. The other was a brand new blue hardcover, filled with scribbled lines and symbols that only I could understand. The smell of baking bread from the oven mingled with the clacking of the keyboard. That became the new sound in this house. It was not music, but it was a purpose. I worked like that for months. There were moments when I thought I would never be able to finish. There were bugs that I spent a whole week searching for, only to discover they were caused by a single, misplaced semicolon. But I did not stop. The dream of Matthias had given me a kind of patience I had not had since he passed away. Then one day, I wrote the final line of code. I pressed the run button, and it worked. Everything was in its right place. My application was not complex. That was intentional. I did not want confusing buttons or flashy colors. The interface was very simple. I made the musical notes large and bold, so that aging eyes could see them clearly. The background was not a glaring bright white, but a soft cream, like the pages of old sheet music that had yellowed with time. And most importantly, there was the music. I chose familiar classical melodies, the pieces our generation had grown up with. I called it Sonata of Memories. The name came to me naturally. It was not just a game. It was for remembering. The next time my grandson visited, I handed him the tablet. "It's done," I said. "Help me put it online." He took it, still with a skeptical look on his face. He swiped through the application. "It looks pretty good, Grandma," he said, and then tapped a few buttons. "There, it's online now." And that was that. I did not expect much. Perhaps a few people in town would use it. That was all. For a week, nothing happened. I still checked every morning, but there was nothing. I started to think that perhaps this was just something for me to do, to fill the time. Then the first email arrived. It came from a small town in Germany that I had never heard of. The sender's name was Klaus. He wrote that his wife had passed away 10 years ago, and he could never remember the name of a song she always used to hum while gardening. He had been trying to find it for years without success. He wrote, "Today, I heard it on your application. I sat in my kitchen and cried for a full hour. Thank you." I read his email 3 times. 2 days later, another email arrived. This time it was from a woman named Mary in Ohio, America. She shared that her teenage grandchildren never talked to her. They would visit only to sit and stare at their phones. But she had shown them my app. She wrote that now they sit with her, trying to beat her high score in the game. She wrote, "You have given me back my grandchildren." Then another came from Italy, another from France, Canada, Australia. The house was still quiet. Matthias was still gone, but the silence had changed. It was no longer an emptiness. My small kitchen was no longer just a place where I cooked for one. It had become a hub, connecting me to all those other lives. For the first time since Matthias passed away, I felt connected again. I was no longer a lonely old woman. I was the one who brought back memories for them. I got used to receiving emails every day. They became a part of my morning, like making a cup of tea. But then, a different kind of email arrived. It sat there in my inbox, standing out from all the rest. Its subject line was not, "Thank you" or "My story." The subject was simply, "Regarding the melody in Sonata of Memories." The sender introduced himself as Jean-Pierre, a music researcher in Paris. His tone was very formal, cold, lacking the warmth of the other emails. He did not write about his wife or his grandchildren. He got straight to the point. He wrote that he was very impressed with the application, but he was not writing to praise me. He was writing to ask about a very short musical phrase, just 5 notes, that played when the application started up. He asked, "Madam, could you please tell me where you got that melody from?" I read the question and felt a little puzzled. A melody. Of all things, he was asking about that tiny melody. I had never really thought about it. It was simply there, in my head, ever since I was a child. It was a part of me. I typed my reply honestly. "Dear Monsieur Jean-Pierre, I do not know. It has just been in my head since I was a child." I sent the email and did not think much more of it. 2 days later, his name appeared in my inbox again. This time, it felt different. I held my breath for a moment before opening it. This email was much longer. I had to put on my glasses and bring the tablet closer to read it clearly. He explained that he had spent years researching the life and works of a pianist named Victor Moreau. The name sounded vaguely familiar. Perhaps I had heard it when I was young. He wrote that the melody was not random. It was a lullaby that Victor Moreau had composed exclusively for his infant daughter, just before he went off to fight in the war. The melody had never been published. Only a few close family members knew of its existence. I had to read that paragraph again. My hands started to feel a little cold. He continued. Victor Moreau and his wife had died. Their daughter was also presumed to have been lost in the chaos of the war. Her body was never found. At the end of the email, he asked me a few questions. Very personal questions. What were your adoptive parents' names? What village did you grow up in? Where were you found? Each question was like a small stone dropped onto the still surface of my memory. I answered him. I typed slowly, 1 word at a time. I told him everything I knew about my past, about the orphanage, about the kind farming family who had adopted me. I pressed send. This time I did not have to wait long. A few hours later, a ping sounded from the tablet. His email had arrived. It was very short. It contained only a single sentence. Madam Alara, I believe that you are his long-lost daughter. I read the sentence. Then I read it again. A 3rd time. I set the tablet down on the table. My hands were shaking. I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner of the room. Then, it seemed as if the ticking stopped too. Everything in the room was the same, the armchair, the table, the cold cup of tea. But I was not. I was no longer the person I had been 5 minutes ago. A piece of the puzzle I never even knew I was missing had suddenly fallen into place. The passion for music was not a coincidence. The feeling that the piano keys were a part of my own body was not a coincidence. It was a legacy. It runs in my blood. It turned out the music of my life did not begin when I first touched the keys. It had begun when I was just a child in my father's arms, with the melody he had written just for me. I sat there for a long time. A very long time. Finally, I pressed my hands onto the arms of the chair and slowly stood up. Every movement felt very slow, very deliberate. I did not walk toward the kitchen. I did not walk toward the window. I walked to the piano. It was still there, in the corner of the room, silent beneath a thin layer of dust. A ghost from the past. But now, it was no longer a ghost. It was a connection. I raised my hand and touched the lid. It was cold and heavy. I used all my strength to slowly open it. A faint creaking sound echoed in the room. A scent of old wood and the dust of time drifted out. The keys were revealed. They were no longer ivory white. but had yellowed into a cream color over the years. These fingers, trembling and wrinkled, once again rested upon the ivory keys, and I played, not a complex sonata, but the very melody of that lullaby, my father's melody. The sound resonated in the silent room. They say it is never too late to start something new, but for me, this was not a new beginning, it was a return. I had used the language of the future to find the melody of the past, to complete the unfinished music of my life. I looked down at my hands resting on the keys, and I smiled. My symphony, at last, was complete. I sat there, before the piano, for a long while. I did not play anything else. Only the melody of that lullaby continued to echo in my mind and in the stillness of the room. Finally, I stood up, without closing the piano lid. I left those cream-colored ivory keys exposed, like a promise that I would not let them be covered in dust again. I returned to the table and picked up the tablet. Its blue light shone on my face, my two worlds, one on this table and one in the corner of the room. I wrote an email to Jean-Pierre. It was very brief. I simply wrote, "Thank you. Now I know." I did not need to explain any further. I think he understood. The next day, I opened my programming application. I looked at the lines of code. They were no longer foreign symbols. They were musical notes, and I knew what I had to do. I would add one more piece of music to Sonata of Memories, a piece that no one else in the world had ever heard, the melody of Victor Moreau. I sat down, placing the tablet on the piano's music stand. The blue light of the screen cast its glow upon the yellowed keys. My left hand rested on the tablet's keyboard. My right hand gently rested on the piano keys. I played the melody again, slowly, note by note. As I played, I typed. I was translating the notes from my father's world into my own, from sound into numbers, from a legacy into a new language. Just then, my grandson walked in. He did not knock. He saw me sitting there, between the old piano and the modern tablet. He stood frozen in the doorway, a look of surprise on his face. He heard the notes rising from the piano, and then he heard those very same notes, perfectly recreated, coming from the tablet's speaker. He walked closer and looked at the screen. "What is that piece, Grandma?" he asked, his voice no longer holding any trace of amusement. I looked up at him, then glanced from the screen to the keys. "It's a new beginning,"